Chapter 2. Tiffany. Tiffany sighed as she sank into the couch. "Long day?" her roommate Holly asked, looking up from her book. Before Tiffany got the job at Patriot Peak, she'd been a nanny, so she'd never rented her own place, a fact she quickly realized when she'd had to check into a hotel after her last nanny gig ended. Thankfully, she'd met Mary Beth, who needed someone to watch her son Lucas while she worked. Because Lucas was at the resort all day, a room had been part of her pay. But when she got offered the position of running the on-site child care center, Tiffany had known she would need to get a place of her own. Mary Beth had introduced her to Holly, and Holly, with her big heart, had offered to let Tiffany rent a room in her house. And the two got along well. Mostly. Holly was an outspoken girl from New York who said whatever came into her mind, while Tiffany was more reserved and quiet. Holly was also loud in the fashion department, while Tiffany wasn't. And when it came to cleaning, most of that fell on Tiffany's shoulders too. However, she couldn't fault Holly too much. The woman owned a restaurant and worked long hours. Plus, she often brought home leftovers for Tiffany. Leftovers that were generally better than anything she made fresh when she had the energy to cook. "They're all long," Tiffany said with a roll of her eyes. She loved her job, but that didn't mean it didn't drain her emotionally and physically every day. "I had a new kid today, and he was determined to shove everything he could find up his nose. I pretty much had to glue him to my side to make sure he didn't earn a trip to the hospital." Holly chuckled and folded down a corner of the page she was on before closing her book. Tiffany pressed her lips together to keep from saying anything about the habit. She'd never been one to dog-ear books. It just felt wrong, in her opinion, almost abusive. Books were meant to be read, but cherished. Time and effort had been poured into the pages, and folding down the corners just seemed dismissive of the hard work. But it was not her book, so she would keep her mouth closed. She chalked it up to Holly's nonchalant attitude about anything domestic. But it was one habit of Holly's that drove her crazy. "I don't know how you deal with little kids all day," Holly said, setting the book on the table next to her and crossing one leg over the other in her "let's chat" position. Maybe it was because Holly was the boss and didn't get to speak to people normally all day, but she often pulled out this therapist side of herself when she was home with Tiffany, and the chats turned into therapy sessions. Holly called them advice sessions more than Tiffany would like. "How can you not love kids? They are so innocent and full of wonder. Everything is new and exciting to them, unlike most of the rest of us who have become cynical and jaded." Okay, that part I can see. Holly had shared many stories of irate customers, so Tiffany knew she understood. But they're so messy and chatty. "You like Lucas," Tiffany pointed out. Although she had to admit Lucas was one of the easier kids to like. Maybe it was the fact that his parents worked at the resort, so he knew he wouldn't get away with bad behavior. Tiffany remembered meeting a kid in school once whose father was the preacher of the church. She'd said there was a different standard of behavior expected for preachers' kids. And Tiffany wondered if the same might be said for Lucas. Was he more well-behaved than some of the others because it was expected, or because he was used to the routine? Or had Mary Beth just done a fantastic job at raising him, even though she'd done it as a single parent for the first few years of his life? Tiffany thought all of the options had probably played a role. "I do." Haley nodded, her lips pulling into a smile. "But Lucas is an amazing kid. He's easy to like. Plus, I've kind of known him since birth." Tiffany chuckled. That definitely helped. Even when she'd been a nanny, it had been easier to like the kids she'd watched grow up than when she first joined a new family. But that had little to do with the kids themselves and more to do with the comfort of the familiar. Okay, well, most of my kids are easy to like. Plus, they really do say the cutest things. Someday, I want to have a whole brood of my own. Speaking of which, when are you going to start on that? Holly's voice had slipped back into her advice tone, and Tiffany decided now would be a perfect time to get herself a drink. I don't know. This was the one topic she hated discussing. Partly because she wasn't a mother yet, though she desperately wanted to be, but also partly because she was still dealing with the insecurities she'd developed after her last long-term relationship. It had ended up being toxic, but Tiffany hadn't realized that until the damage had been done. She could still hear Connor's incredulous voice saying, "You want to give up law to be just a mom?" Just a mom? The words still felt like knives when she thought them. For as long as she could remember, she'd wanted to be a mom more than anything in the world. She'd pretended that she was with her dolls and stuffed animals, feeding them, changing them, even rocking them to sleep. Maybe it was because she grew up an only child. Maybe it was because her own mother, like her father, seemed to care more about money than being the parent Tiffany had longed for. Whatever the reason, she'd grown up with a desire to be a mom pulsing in her brain. And though she'd tried to take the pre-law classes her father wanted her to, she'd felt no desire, no drive to be a lawyer. So she'd switched to a child care and development degree. Taking care of other people's kids wasn't the same as having her own, but Tiffany thought it would ease the ache in her heart until she married and started a family. Connor, however, had flipped when he'd found out. He'd called her an anachronism from the 50s and berated her as if being a mother was second place to any job a woman should have. She'd broken off the relationship, but not before his words had left their mark. Was she wrong to place such an importance on the idea of motherhood? She didn't think so. But even if she was, she couldn't help it, couldn't change it. Down in her soul, she knew she was destined to be a mother. But what if the next guy thought like Connor? What if, due to the economy or any number of reasons, men now expected their wives to work outside the home and not just be a mom? Ironic as it was, Connor's reaction and his words had made her wary of relationships, and so she'd dated little since breaking it off with him. As much as she wanted to be a mother, she hadn't wanted to feel so demeaned again. So after receiving her degree, she'd turned to nannying, using it as an excuse for why she couldn't date. "I've just been too busy with work to date, really," she said, returning to the conversation. "Plus, I have this pain that flares up now and then. I certainly don't want that happening on a date." "You are not that busy with work," Holly said, following her into the kitchen. "And what's with this pain? You never mentioned it before." Tiffany flipped a dismissive gesture as she opened the fridge. "I'm sure it's nothing. It only lasts a few days anyway, and then it's gone." She grabbed a can of sparkling water, wishing there was something stronger in the fridge at the moment. She was not a drinker, but her love life, or lack thereof, was the one topic that made her think about becoming one. "Have you been to the doctor and had it looked at?" Tiffany glanced at her roommate. What was with the concern? It was just a little pain. "No, like I said, it doesn't last long, and I have work every weekday. There aren't many doctors around here open on the weekends." That was the excuse she told herself anyway. She was fairly certain the local clinic would see her on a Saturday if necessary. "I'm sure Mary Beth would give you time off to get it looked at. I really think you should go in." And Tiffany was really sure she was done with this conversation. "If it gets worse, I promise I will." Holly's lips pursed, and tiny lines erupted on her forehead as if she wanted to argue, But instead, she decided to change the topic. Back to the original question. Okay, I'll let it go if you promise to get seen if it gets worse. But we really should talk about your love life. Do you realize you haven't been on a date since I've known you? Not one. Tiffany sighed. Holly, I told you why. Connor was an idiot, Holly finished for her. Look, I know his words hurt, but he was one guy, Tiffany. One stupid, idiotic guy who obviously wasn't the right person for you. You can't let his view turn you off men forever. Not forever, just until I find the right one. The one who would be happy she wanted to be a mother. The one who would want a big family just like she did. The one who wouldn't find her dream appalling and old-fashioned and stupid. She took a swig of the soda and crossed to the pantry. Food. That was always a good distraction. Holly threw her hands in the air. You have to look to find the right one. If you want to have a house full of kids, you kind of need a husband to help with that. Well, she didn't actually need a husband, though adopting as a single mother was certainly a challenge. And while she could look into donor banks, they held no appeal for her. So having a husband would certainly make her dream of a big family easier. And she did want a husband and a family, so why wasn't she looking? The truth was that she was scared. Scared that the next guy would be like the last guy. So while she did want to try again someday, she wasn't sure someday had arrived just yet. She pulled out a tin of cashews and pried off the lid before grabbing a handful. You haven't dated anyone seriously either. She shot her roommate a pointed look before popping the cashews in her mouth. Maybe not seriously, but I have dated. Holly folded her arms across her chest and raised her eyebrows at Tiffany. None of them have worked out, but at least I'm taking a chance. You need to as well. Tiffany shook her head as she replaced the lid on the cashews and returned it to the pantry. I'm just not ready yet. With that attitude, you'll never be ready. Holly's voice had softened as if she knew it was time to stop pushing. On another note, the dishwasher is broken again. Again? Tiffany crossed to the contraption and opened the door. A week ago, the thing had decided to stop washing the dishes. But after an hour-long internet search, another few hours watching videos, and an even longer amount of time tinkering around with it, Tiffany had thought she had fixed it. Yeah, now it's not draining. I really think it's time we call a professional. Sure enough, there was a few inches of water down in the bottom of the machine. Great. Watching more videos was not how she had planned on spending her weekend. I'm sure I can fix it. I'll give you 2 days, Holly said, heading back toward the living room. And then I'm calling a professional. Tiffany sighed and leaned against the sink. Maybe Holly was right. About everything.